Thanks for being here tonight. My name is Sean Beckett. I'm the staff naturalist here. I hear the speaker tonight is great, so I hope you enjoy him. I get to introduce myself. Before we get started, though, a couple of announcements is North Branch is going to Yellowstone with me in the end of May, May 20th to 27th, and there's one space left on the trip. So if you aren't already convinced that Yellowstone's an amazing place, you will be convinced in an hour from now. So keep that in the back of your mind if all of this gets you really excited to head out into the wilderness. So in addition to being the naturalist here, I come here from having worked as a wolf guide in Yellowstone Park for years, and I still go back there every year to lead a couple trips. I'll be heading out there next week for the better part of the month to lead winter wolf watching expeditions out in the park. So before we dive into the story, a couple of announcements related to this is that there are some pictures, some graphic images of carcasses and that kind of thing. If I remember, I will tell you in advance of those when they come up, but just be forewarned. Nothing too crazy, but you know, there's a little bit of blood here and there. And the other thing I want to apologize for up front is that I'm going to get your political hackles up. And that's only because I've been talking about wolves for years and years, and I've realized that there's no way to talk about these animals effectively without it eventually touching on politics here and there. And I'm the last person in the world that likes to talk about politics and religion and all that kind of stuff. That's like not okay dinner time conversation. And so just know that when you feel your hackles getting up, I'm doing that intentionally and for a reason and selectively. And so just know that I'm throwing those punches very selectively throughout for particular reasons. So just trust that if your hackles go up, they'll hopefully go back down. And I have a method to that madness. Okay. And the last announcement too is that this isn't really going to be a talk about biology and figures, and I'm not going to be up here using my background as a wildlife scientist necessarily, because you can't tell the story of wolves without really speaking to their emotions and the decisions that they make, all the reasons why wolves and humans are really similar. And so, my biology teachers, growing up and going through school, would always say, we can't anthropomorphize. How can we know that this animal is feeling love or joy or sadness or sorrow or all these other animals or all these other emotions? And then you see a wolf and you realize there's no way to actually describe what's going on without drawing on those sorts of emotions and those sorts of descriptions. I think our biggest failing, perhaps, or one of them as a human species, is thinking that we have the monopoly on this wide range of intentions and feelings and emotions and spans of perceptions and all these things that we call human. Well, a lot of animals are doing this all the time, as you'll see. So just I guess my warning there is I'm going to anthropomorphize a lot, so just deal with it. All right. Just the light switch on the right hand. Okay. So tonight's really about storytelling. It's about telling the stories of these amazing animals, all the things that they do, all the controversies that happen in order to get them to the Yellowstone landscape in the first place. And this is a story that's going to be in several different parts. Part one is going to be just introducing you into this ecosystem where these animals live and kind of setting the stage. and having you join me on a wolf watching trip out in Yellowstone. The second part of the story is the story of our relationship with these animals over the years, and how our feelings about them have really spanned the spectrum of the worst of the worst to the best of the best, and just our relationship with wolves. The third part is going to be about the reintroduction, about the monumental moment in 1995 when we decided to put wolves back onto the Western landscape, and how that worked and why that happened. And then the last part of this story is the story of the saga of a particular wolf dynasty in Yellowstone, and tracking the lives of a particular family of wolves from the very reintroduction all the way up until about 2 weeks ago, and showing the dramatic differences in personalities and life stories of these animals. So that's what we got going on. So where we're talking about is a place called the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. This is an area that is really big. The Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem is the largest intact ecosystem in the lower 48. It is 18 million acres large. And to put that in perspective, Vermont plus New Hampshire plus Massachusetts is a little bit less than 18 million acres. It's a tremendous amount of space. If you look here, and this is the north. This is the state of Wyoming. You have Montana to the north, Idaho to the west, and this is what we call the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. It's kind of this blob I'm putting over here. It has within it Yellowstone National Park, and then this piece in dark green attached to it is Grand Teton National Park. It makes it about 3 million acres, and surrounding that is all sorts of national forests and BLM lands and other sorts of public lands and private lands. But you know, it's all fine to look at a map, but this is what it really looks like. This is what this landscape looks like. It is really big, and it is wild. And it's a place that's big enough to house our imaginations. Right? It wasn't that long ago that Westerners actually figured out that this place existed, right? Lewis and Clark, when they were moving across the West in 1803, they kind of sidestepped this ecosystem. There was a point where they could look south and they could see some of these mountains from where their travels were, and they just thought, oh, I wonder what's over there. And it wasn't another 80 years until a government expedition actually came in and surveyed this area. So it's huge. So if you think about what it was like when explorers were charting maps of the world, what did they do when they came across areas that they hadn't been to? They had to map places they hadn't been. What do you draw on that map? Well, that's where you put your imagination. Right? The blank spaces on our world maps used to be full of dragons and unicorns and palaces and kingdoms that were just totally imaginary, places where rivers ran with gold, all of this kind of stuff, right? And this is one of those places, right? This is a blank spot on the map where we put our imagination. The thing about Yellowstone is what's actually there is sometimes crazier than what our imagination can actually dream up, right? Places where water is rocketing out of the ground, boiling hundreds of feet in the air, where steam clouds rise half a mile high, right? Where the churning of boiling water under your feet actually feels, you can feel the vibration of that. It sounds like you're in the middle of a combustion engine, right? Places where fur trappers back in the day would say that it's so wild and the mountains were so tall that if you were a bird, you'd better bring a lunch if you were going to fly over the And it's a place where, as Lewis and Clark were traveling out and were at the foothills of the Rockies, they looked around at massive herds of bison that were so numerous that they called them, quote, the moving multitude that darkened the plains. And so, also in those blank spots on the map, that's where you put the things that we'd rather not think about. The things that we think don't really belong in the mapped places, we put them there. The things that are our fears, the pieces of ourselves that we wish we didn't really have, right? The things that don't belong, we kind of squirrel away on these unmarked places on the map. And that's, so it's very fitting that this ecosystem is the place where we go to talk about and think about wolves on the landscape. And what I think is remarkable about this Yellowstone ecosystem, about wolves, is that nowadays we have this itch to to see reality, to really understand what's real, right? We have all these layers of technology and economics and politics and this and that and all the other things that go on in our day-to-day, and sometimes it's hard to remember what's beneath all of that, what's really down at the core of all that, and that's what people find when they come here to this place, and particularly when they see this animal. These are animals that are living wild and living raw, wild lives. So welcome to our Yellowstone wolf watching expedition. I want to introduce you to somebody else that's on the trip with us. Her name is Carol, and Carol is a woman from Ohio, and Carol is 77 years old. And Carol, she worked before she retired. She worked her whole life as a kindergarten teacher. And Carol, her mission in her work, one of them was to paint wolves as the protagonists instead of the antagonists. So she had stuffed wolves in her classroom. She incorporated wolves into the stories and the activities that kids did. And after she retired, she wrote children's books about wolves, where the wolves are the good guys, right? Well, Carol got some really unfortunate medical news, and she learned that she wasn't going to really be able to be around for a heck of a lot longer. And though Carol had been a lifelong advocate of wolves, she had never seen a wolf in the wild. And so she spent every last cent of her life savings to come on a wolf watching trip to try to see a wolf in the wilds here in Yellowstone. And so we traveled around this ecosystem. Of that 18 million acres, we were kind of focusing in on about 3 million acres of that we spent 7 days. A monumental landscape, absolutely massive, absolutely frigid. We think it's cold outside right now. Yesterday in Yellowstone, where this shot was taken, it was 30 degrees below zero. That's like a regular day for a wolf, too. So massive landscape. And we had been out for 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. We had seen all sorts of amazing things. We had seen things like magpies riding on the back of bison. We had seen bighorn sheep ramming their heads together. We had seen bison snow plowing through 4 feet of snow. We had seen otters and coyotes pouncing on stuff and foxes and all this, but we hadn't seen a wolf. And it was approaching the last day of the entire trip. And so the last morning, we wake up. And at the end of the day, we're going to end up at the airport to go home. This is our last shot to see wolves. And we wake up, and it is a howling blizzard. And the visibility is zero, right? And so Carol is crushed. I, of course, am crushed. And so we head out into the Lamar Valley, which is one of the major spots that people go to look for wolves. And we waited and waited and waited for the weather to clear just a little bit. And when the weather cleared, we noticed that there were these tracks in the ground that crossed the road and headed off towards the backside of this, or to the foothills of these mountains. And as the weather cleared, we looked to the distance. We saw 2 ravens, one coming in from the left, one coming in from the right, and they landed in the same place. And we put up our spotting scopes on that, and we saw this wolf. 926 was her name, 926. So I should mention that. So remember I said I was going to anthropomorphize a lot, right? Well, biologists, when they radio collar a wolf, it is given a number. And that number is kind of co-opted by people who follow these wolves, and that just kind of becomes this name. Just like my name is Sean, that wolf's name is 926. Biologists give numbers to animals so that we think of them as units in a population where this animal is the same as that animal. It's just, all numbers. That doesn't work with wolves. So this wolf's name is 926. And I'll be using a lot of numbers today. So it's not to bore you with math or anything. It's that these wolves have names that we use to keep track of who's who, and this is 926. Anywho, so 926 is the alpha female of this pack called the Lamar Canyon Pack. And we got to watch them leave this carcass. We only saw them for a few minutes, but that any sighting of a wolf in the wild is a remarkable sighting. Right? This is something that most people don't ever get to see. The snow is still coming down a little bit. Every so often we have to go and we have to take our cloths, we have to brush the snow off the spotting scopes. The Carol scope, we have to go over and we have to wipe tears off the eyelids. We headed out, we headed home. This wolf 926 is my favorite wolf. And I have one framed photograph of a wolf in our house, and it's of 926 when she was a year old. Because this wolf has saved me just like this on so many wildlife watching excursions where it's the last day of a trip. And we've been looking and looking and looking, glassing the hills forever. I mean, we're looking over the course of 3 million acres for what amounts to about 30 or 40 wolves that are between 4 or 5 packs. Imagine looking across all of northern Vermont for 40 coyotes, right? It's not easy. And I'm not a particularly spiritual or religious person necessarily, but 926 has really made me think long and hard about what's out there, because she is karma in a nutshell. She appears for people who really deserve to see her and put in her their work to see a wolf, and they're there for the right reasons, right? So that's our first part. That's our wolf watching trip to Yellowstone. So that's how Carol responded to this situation of seeing a wolf in the wild. And for probably most of you, and for me, that's a really beautiful story. It's amazing to witness her reaction to that, to have such a glowing, positive reaction to seeing this animal in the wild. Because a wolf is a lot more than just its fur, right? It's more than the sum of its parts. It's everything else that is combined into this. All of the sentiment that people have had around wolves over the years is all wrapped up into this 120-pound animal, right? So everybody's got an opinion about wolves, and that's their biggest problem. Of course, Western Native American tribes, a lot of them feel that wolves are kind of their spirit brothers. They recognize that wolves hunt the same thing that we do. They hunt the elk, they hunt the bison, right? And not only do we share the same prey as them, but we also share a lot of the same faults and the same tendencies. And watching wolves long enough, you realize that, oh, I recognize what that wolf is doing in my own family or something like that. And so this was not lost on Native American tribes. But that was not necessarily the case with Westerners, right? With Western Europeans. From the very beginning, wolves were seen in Western cultures as literally the Antichrist, right? From all the way back, wolves are seen as literally the embodiment of Satan, as the devil's dogs, right? All the things that we don't like about ourselves, we have scapegoated into wolves. I don't understand that phrase scapegoat, because for all reasons it should be scape wolf is the that term. So starting in the beginning, we had so much animosity towards wolves, and that came with us when we landed on this continent and started spreading, westward as Americans, settling the plains and settling the prairies, right? And so we systematically eradicated wolves from the United States, from this landscape. And it was done for a bunch of reasons. The first one was an extension of our manifest destiny, right? Where we were moving on the heels of the Homestead Acts, we were heading out west, we were setting up shop, raising cattle, proving up land, building homesteads and farmsteads and cabins, across the west. And cattlemen were complaining that it was far too hard to raise livestock in a landscape full of all these predators. And so cattlemen killed off every single wolf that they could find. And government officials were hired to go out there and trap and kill all of the rest, right? And so it was seen as an opportunity for us to stake a claim and to pacify the wilderness, to kill off all these predators, to make it easier for us to live there. Right? So that was kind of the original reason which we were eradicating wolves off the landscape. But it went farther than that. You might recognize this hat here, or that type of hat. That's a National Park Service flat cap, right? Back in those days, in the late 1800s, all the way through the mid 1900s, our understanding of ecology was essentially non-existent. We didn't think about ecosystems and systems and how one animal influences another. We thought that, what could be better if we want to be good stewards of elk, say, or bighorn sheep or bison, what could be better for an elk than not getting eaten by a wolf, right? And so we thought it was an act of good stewardship and good shepherding of our natural resources to kill off as many predators as possible, right? And this is a Field and Stream cover from 1955, which is not all that long ago for our attitudes around ecology to be so wildly different. The term ecology didn't really even come onto the radar screen until the 60s. This is a really famous photo of the very last wolves to set foot in Yellowstone Park for over 70 years. Because the National Park Service, as their duty to manage that landscape to what we thought was the right way to do things, was to kill off all the predators and to kill off all the wolves. And so this is the last litter of pups. The adults, the adults of this pack were already killed off. The pups were rounded up and they were brought off to slaughter. But before being slaughtered, they brought them to the Mammoth Hot Springs Visitor Center in the northwest corner of the park, which is what this building is behind it. Behind this fellow, he's a park supervisor. And the public was allowed to play with these wolf pups all day before they were taken away. These are the very last wolves in Yellowstone. This picture was taken, I think, 1926 or thereabouts. So the fascinating thing, I think, about all this is not so much that we were killing wolves, but the way in which we were doing it. This is where going to be a couple of pictures that might get your hackles up a little bit. Apologize for that. So no other animal in the history of the world has received the same level of vengeance. No animals had so much hatred and animosity applied towards them as wolves. It's not good enough to kill them, but you have to make them suffer, right? And so there were all sorts, and right, these are animals, again, were embodiments of the devil, of all the things that we hated these were evil animals. And so by making them suffer, this is payback for what they had done to the elk and all the things that they had eaten over the course of their lives, right? So it's not that they were just shot and trapped, but they were shot in the guts so that they would, die slowly over the course of a week. The carcasses that they took down were baited with strychnine, so they would die violent deaths from neurotoxin. The pups were used as bait to catch the adults. They would put pups in as bait in big neck traps to catch the adults that were trying to get them out. They would bait fish hooks with meat and put it outside the den so the pups would swallow the fish hooks. They would blow the lower jaws off these wolves. They would wire them shut. All this sentiment, too, was happening all the way through the 50s, right? So after we got back from World War II, a lot of the soldiers who had been fighting the Nazis over in that theater came back. Many of them worked for the government after their service in the format of these game management agencies, the Park Service, the Forest Service, or whatever. And when they went out to control the predators, to kill the wolves, they actually called it going out and hunting Nazis. But the other side of this, which I think is so important to remember, is that for every person that's out there that absolutely hates wolves to their absolute core, there's somebody else out there that thinks that wolves breathe rainbows and fart glitter and that everything is wonderful and that wolves are the greatest thing to ever happen to ecology and to us and all of this. And I think what that misses is that these animals are violent predators, right? They take down prey on a daily basis or every other day or thereabouts. And when they do so, best case scenario, if you're an elk and you're being attacked by a wolf, best case scenario is that you're suffocated to death from the 1,200-pound PSI strength. That's twice the bite strength of a German Shepherd, right? The crushing bite of, on your throat from one of these wolves, and you die over the course of 10 minutes while other members of the pack are eating the other half of you. That's best case scenario, right? And so imagine being out there and seeing this as a rancher, as a hunter, as somebody out there on this landscape and actually coming across this. That doesn't, that means something that's significant. And when that is applied towards, when that violence is applied towards your own livestock, it adds another level to this, right? There's a couple of major lobbies of groups that are very anti-wolf out west, and one of them is the livestock industry. And the other one is the elk hunting industry, the hunting industry. And I'm not going to get into the elk hunting industry at all in the course of this talk, because that's a can of worms that I'll talk about next year for next natural experience. because there's a lot of data there, and there's a lot of graphs and figures and reasons why elk hunters and wolves can get along. But if you are a rancher and you live on the back door of Yellowstone Park and of these ecosystems, this is a real threat that you have, right? Wolves do kill things, and it's not pretty. And if you walk out to your cattle, they may be grazing in public land, which is its own, can of worms to talk about whether or not that's something that should happen or not happen. But you walk out to your cow or your horse, and this is what you find. That's a problem. And I'm just going to take that slide away for a second. So it doesn't happen very often. Okay. In Wyoming last year, there was 150 livestock depredations by wolves in all of Wyoming. There's 4 million cattle in Wyoming. So that gives you an idea of the proportion of this problem. Proportionally speaking, it's very, very, very rare. But if it happens to you, it's a really big deal, right? And so there's a lot of animosity, not so much because there's a guaranteed risk of your cows getting eaten, but because if you're a rancher and you're on the doorsteps of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, this is what your backyard looks like. This is the Paradise Valley of Montana. All of that is the edge of the national park and the edge of the Zorka National Forest, where there's healthy populations of wolves there. And right here, you're trying to graze your cattle on your land. And you may or may not ever actually have wolves coming and eating your cows. But you're awake every night wondering if your cows are okay. You're paying extra money to have a cowboy out there with your cows on grazing land to make sure that wolves aren't taking your cattle. You are constantly thinking about this actual threat, right? If you allow me to get your hackles up even further right now, I would liken this to think about a similar situation in our culture, right? The likelihood of a person being killed by a murderer is extremely low, but it's something that is a serious thing that we think about in our culture, right? And so if you are raising cattle and you have personally delivered that calf from that cow in a cold barn on a January day 2 years ago, and you wake up and it's being eaten by a wolf, that's a valid reason to not really like these animals very much, right? So that's the political landscape, I guess, or like the cultural landscape behind that was underpinning this idea to reintroduce these animals into Yellowstone in the first place in 1995. Imagine the challenges involved in trying to get a reintroduction off the ground when that is the prevailing attitude in the western states, right? It's incredible that it happened at all, and it took over 20 years for this to actually happen. So what happened from between the 60s and the mid-90s when wolves were introduced was a major change in our understanding of ecology. It used to be that what would be better for an elk than not getting eaten by a wolf, right? And that changed to our idea of understanding ecosystems and understanding keystone predators and understanding that healthy predator populations keep prey animals in check, keeps the entire ecosystem healthy, right? This idea of having all of the pieces of the puzzle in play allows for a healthy ecosystem. And that's where our understanding has evolved to in the last 30 years or 40 years or so that enabled this interest in reintroducing wolves. So now the question is, if you want to reintroduce wolves, where do you get your wolves from if they're all exterminated, right? There's wolves in Canada, but do you think that Canadian culture around wolves is really any different than Americans' culture around wolves? No, they're hunted and persecuted up there just like down here. And so the Park Service in 1995 went to Canadian trappers and they said, how much do you get for a wolf pelt? $500 for a good wolf pelt? Okay, we'll give you $1,500 if you can bring us a wolf alive. To which basically they all said, the only good wolf is a dead wolf. Right. And so the government had really not made much headway in actually getting wolves from Canada. So that's where this guy showed up. This guy's name is Carter Niemeyer. And he grew up hunting, fishing, trapping, all this stuff. And he worked for wildlife services for the better part of his career. He was thoroughly steeped in predator control and management, killing coyotes, all this kind of stuff. And he was sent up by the Park Service up to Canada, and they told him, go up there and don't come back without a whole bunch of wolves. And so he went up to the door of the main trapper who they had been liaising with, this guy named, I think, Barry. Knocked on Barry's door. He said, I'm here to give you money for live wolves. And Barry took him around behind the house and showed him 2 dead wolves in the truck and said, those are the only wolves I'm bringing you. And so they got, talking in heated words, I'm sure, for a while. And then, Barry thought that this guy, all he was, some Yankee Yahoo from the city that was coming up, didn't know anything about Western culture and what these trappers were really feeling and what this was all about. And so Barry said, all right, I'll tell you what. He takes the 2 wolves out of the truck and drags them into his living room, throws them down right on the carpet in the middle of the living room, and says, if you can skin out your wolf faster than me, I'll get you your wolves. And so the reason that we have wolves in Yellowstone is because this guy beat this guy in a skinning contest with 2 Canadian wolves. What Barry didn't know is that this guy had skinned about 6,000 coyotes in his career and could do it blindfolded. And so he beat him 6 ways to Sunday. And Barry was impressed and said, all right, I'll get you your wolves. So fast forward, a few weeks, they capture a bunch of wolves in traps, they collar them, they let the collared wolves go back out into the wild so that they would find their packs. Then they came in with helicopters following those radio collars. These are tranquilized, not shot. They tranquilized all the wolves that they could in each pack. They put them in kennels. They flew them to Yellowstone, to the Gardner airstrip outside of the park. And this was the famous day in 1995. Where these wolves were brought back into Yellowstone through this kind of sacred archway. On the backside of this arch, this is called the Roosevelt Arch. On the backside of this, it says the National Park Service motto, which is for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. So take that however you want. But, so the wolves are in these vehicles here, and you can imagine everybody on the inside of this gate is cheering and hooray and all this. On the outside of this gate is a large, kind of counter protest of all this, of people, up in arms, literally, about all these wolves. You can imagine the security detail involved in transporting these wolves in these kennels, across the Paradise Valley and into Yellowstone, right? So they brought these wolves in these kennels. And they set them down into the reacclimation pens. And they brought in, there were 3 acclimation pens in the park, and they brought in 1 pack of each one of these acclimation pens in each one of the years. And the reason for this is that wolves have no problem getting up and walking 1,000 miles if they feel like it. So their biggest fear was that they would let these wolves out and they would walk right back to northern Alberta where they came from. That was a real concern. And so instead, they put them into these reacclimation pens, these acclimation pens that were very tall with fences that curled in on the top, and they went way into the ground so they couldn't dig underneath them, right? And there they stayed for 10 weeks, looking out through the chain link fence at elk walking around on the hillside and smelling bison, on the hillside. The Park Service would bring in carcasses of animals so they could feed. And then 10 weeks later, they were released, and the fence was cut open, and they went out onto the landscape. And this is what was worried would happen, was that these wolves would immediately take off, go over the park line, and just cause havoc among the ranching community immediately. But what actually happened was, for the most part, these wolves that were reintroduced into the park set up shop right there in Yellowstone, right around that acclimation pen. So let's add some names, or I should say maybe some numbers, to this story. This is where our dynasty is going to begin. This is wolf number 9. And number 9 was among the first wolves reintroduced into Yellowstone Park in 1995. This whole reintroduction, there's only 31 wolves. All this fuss that we have today about the wolves in Yellowstone and the whole wolf population out west, this was sparked by the reintroduction of just 31 wolves, of which number 9 was one of the very first ones to be brought in those kennels. She was in one of those kennels in that picture that I showed before. So number 9 and her mate, number 10, were reintroduced into this pen together, right? When they cut open the pen, 9 and 10 immediately left the park. And they went here. They went 20 miles outside of the park to the eastern side of the Beartooth Mountain, Beartooth Plateau, which on the one hand is extremely wild and extremely remote. On the other hand, has none of the protections afforded by being inside the national park. And furthermore, the other side of this, if you kept going across the road and down, you'd end up in Billings, Montana. So you are actually, as far as the West is concerned, you're near a pretty populated place where there's a lot of people that aren't too happy about wolves. So of course, number 9 and number 10, they leave the park, they go over there, and number 9 promptly gives birth to a whole bunch of pups in a den that she has dug way over on the eastern side of the Beartooth Mountains, with the lights of Billings off in the distance. And the Park Service says, oh no. But then it gets even worse, because immediately after that, number 10 is poached by someone. So number 9 loses her alpha male. And so here's number 9 with pups. And as a female who's just given birth to pups, you rely on the rest of your pack to bring food back to you and feed you and feed your pups. And so without another adult wolf around to provide, those pups are doomed. Maybe number 9 would be doomed too. So the Park Service said, well, this is not good. We better go get her. And so they went out there and they set a leg hold trap, a padded leg hold trap, to try to catch number 9. And they literally sat outside of a motel room in Billings with their radio telemetry antenna pointed up towards the mountains, because when the leg hold trap triggered, it would emit a signal. And so they're just waiting for this trap to get triggered. So the signal goes off, they go out, they get number 9, and they go to pick up the pups, and there's no pups there. So they look and they look and they look, and the pups are found 3/4 of a mile away in a talus slope on the side of the mountain, a place that number 9 had brought her pups to and stashed them there when she first scented that trapper setting the trap to catch her. Right? So the Park Service is up there on the talus slope. They're hanging, down to their ankles in talus with Leatherman pliers, reaching down as far as they can, pulling out wolf pups by the ear because they're so far down in there. But they get them all, and they put them back into the reacclimation pens, and the Park Service sits down and thinks, okay, now what are we doing? But before they could really get their wits about them, the Park Service that is, a storm comes through, and 10 trees are felled over the top of this acclimation pen fence. And almost all of the pups get up and walk the trees and jump over it, and the pups are now stranded on the outside of the fence. And number 9 is stranded by herself with one other pup inside the fence. And the Park Service is out there trying to catch the wolf pups in big nets, and they're just way too wily and fast. They can't do it because they don't move down fast. And so the Park Service is like, all right, there's nothing we can do now except to just cut the fence open and let number 9 out and just hope it works out. The Park Service goes out there on the day to cut open the fence. They have the big cable cutters, and they look, and just next to the acclimation pen is another wolf out of nowhere, wolf number 8. And number 8 was reintroduced into a different acclimation pen earlier on. He left his pack, was looking, wandering across the landscape looking for mates, who knows, and he came across number 9 at this acclimation site. And in this situation, anything could happen, right? This is a big, alpha male who is coming across a bunch of pups that are genetically not related to him. And a female inside that pen that could become a potential mate, right? And so the Park Service is like, oh, what's going to happen here? And number 8 goes over and starts playing with the pups. He starts rolling over on his belly, and the pups are jumping all over him, and it's very happy and fun. And number 8 goes to the fence, number 9 goes to the fence, and they're kind of nuzzling and all of this. And so everything seems great. And so the Park Service cuts open the fence. Number 9 leaves. Number 8 and number 9 become a famous alpha male and alpha female pair of the Rose Creek pack. And together they raised litter after litter after litter of pups. And by, I think, 2004, 2005, about 75% of wolves in Yellowstone had some genetics related to wolf number 9. He's a very famous matriarch. So that's the first generation of this story. Remember that one pup that didn't leave the acclimation pen, that stayed in there with mom? That was wolf number 21. That's the next wolf you're going to learn about here. wolf number 21. And 21, from a very early age, was different than the rest. He was regarded as a strong, brave, confident, powerful wolf. Even as a pup, when the Park Service would come and they would put in carcasses into the acclimation pen, all the wolves would always go to the other side of the pen and just cower against the edge. But number 21 would stand there between the family and the Park Service and just growl at them, right? Defending his pack, even as a little pup. And when all the other pups left the acclimation site, he stayed in there to defend mom, right? A couple of years after the acclimation pen part of his life, and he just kind of a subordinate member of the Rose Creek pack, the Druid Peak pack, which is the next pack over, the next territory over. The Druids were perhaps Yellowstone's most famous pack of wolves in history, largely because of 21, which you'll learn about in a second. The alpha male of the Druid Peak pack was poached. He was shot by somebody just over the border outside of the park. And so it left a big power vacuum in the Druid Peak pack. And number 21 leaves his pack, leaves the Rose Creek pack, and waltzes straight into the Druid territory and right into the pack and says, "I'm your new alpha male." And that is one of the most brazen things a wolf could possibly do, right? The leading cause of death for wolves is death by other wolf, right? If you walk into another pack, you have a very good chance of being immediately torn to shreds by other wolves there, right? But here's 21 who walks right in. He senses that there is a need for leadership, and he walks in, and immediately they cede power right to him, and he becomes the alpha male of the Druid Peak pack. Now, 21 is regarded as like a super wolf. You know, a lot of folks say that he's like a fictional character, but he was actually real, because he was extremely strong. He was an extremely good fighter. He was known to be able to fend off 6 other intruding wolves all by himself. And he had done it on multiple occasions, fighting off wolves like Muhammad Ali or like Bruce Lee or something like that. But for as tough and as strong as he was, his favorite thing to do was play with the pups. And he loved to let his pups roll all over him, and he loved losing play fights to his pups. So he would, pretend to fall down and let the pups grab him by the neck and all this kind of stuff, and he would, admit defeat, and he just loved doing that. And so that was kind of his kind of fatherly expression. But in addition to his strength and his sensitivity, he was also regarded as magnanimous, because he never lost a single fight in his entire life. But he also never killed an opponent in his entire life either, which is really, really unusual. So on one occasion, there was this wolf called 302. 302 we gave a better name called Casanova. And it was called Casanova because it was this beautiful jet black male that had left his pack and was wandering around. And the Druid Peak pack now is pretty much 21, his mate, and a whole bunch of daughters. And Casanova would kind of hang out in the periphery of the pack, howling up to the daughters like Don Juan, like serenading them, howl. And the daughters would kind of come over and check him out. And oftentimes, if another male that's outside the pack comes in, that's another good reason for the alphas to come and just kill you on the spot. Because in a wolf pack, usually the only breeding members of that pack are the alpha male and the alpha female. And all the other wolves kind of take care of the pups of the alpha pair. And so the alphas have a lot of interest in making sure that other wolves in the pack are not diluting the pack's ability to take care of their pups. So 302 wears out his welcome a little bit with 21, and 21 runs him down, 130 pounds, big, huge, broad shoulders like a linebacker, and pummels him to the ground and starts tearing him apart. The rest of the Druid Peak pack comes in and is attacking him and fighting him, and then out of nowhere, 21 stops, and he backs off. And he kind of just looks at 302, and the rest of the pack stops and looks at 21 like, wait, I thought we were supposed to kill this guy. And 21 lets him go, and 302 just slinks off. So one of the directors of the Yellowstone Wolf Recovery Project, named Rick McIntyre, when he tells this story, at this point he likes to say, why did Batman never kill Joker? Now, if you're answering that as a human, you'd say because it's very impressive if you, as the victor, vanquish your enemy and you kill your enemy, that's impressive. But what's even more impressive is if you let that enemy survive. It shows an incredible amount of confidence and mercy that you can let your enemies go. Okay, so I'll circle back to that in a second. So 21 and his mate 42. They used to say that 42 was twice the wolf that 21 ever was. 42 was a remarkable alpha female. She was an extremely good mother. 21 and 42 together reigned the Lamar Valley for years and years. They grew their pack up to 37 members. It was the largest wolf pack ever in recorded history, 37. And that was an artificially inflated pack size because there was a really, really high prey base. In that northern range of Yellowstone where these wolves hung out, there was about 17,000 elk wandering the northern range. The carrying capacity for that habitat, that ecosystem, was about 3,000 elk. So in the absence of wolves, in the absence of grizzly bears, in the absence of mountain lions, the elk population in this ecosystem had really gone through the roof. And after the reintroduction of wolves, wolves could just look anywhere and there's an elk, and there's an elk, and there's an elk. And so it was easy pickings for a long time. So here's the Druid Peak Pack 2142 with just an endless supply of food all the time in their Lamar Valley. One day, the pack is traveling towards the edge of their territory and an invading pack comes in, and 42, mate of 21, is killed by the Radley pack. She's ripped to shreds by the Molly's pack, the Radley pack. And 21 sits down and howls for like 2 straight days. He had never been seen to do that ever before. No wolf watcher had ever watched a wolf howl like that. If that's not mourning, I don't know what is. A few weeks after that, now number 21 is 9 years old. That is like ancient for a wolf. The average lifespan of a wolf is like 4 to 5 years. Because living as a wolf is tough. Around every corner you're getting kicked in the head by an elk or getting attacked by another wolf, or there's all sorts of things out there. So wolves don't live very long. So number 21, he was 9 years old. And one day, wolf number 21, the pack was out hunting elk, and number 21 just sits down, the rest of his pack goes off without him. He turns around and he starts walking the other direction. And he walks up onto the very tip top of this mountain right here. This is the Lamar Valley that we're looking down. And it took him a while to get up there because he was arthritic and moving slow. His mate had just been killed a couple weeks before, and he sits down there on top of that mountain and looks out over this territory that he had been the alpha male of for so long. And off in one direction towards us was the reacclimation pen that he could see that was still there from when he was first released into the park as a pup 9 years ago. And off in the other direction, he could look down and see his den site where he had raised so many litters of pups at 42 and he had lived out so much of his life. And so sitting there on top of that mountain, looking out at this landscape, he also has a nose full of the scent of 42, whose scent was lingering in the sagebrush on the trees and on the trail from having walked through there only a couple weeks before. And he curls up under a tree and he dies on his own terms after 9 years of living out life as a wolf in Yellowstone. Shortly after that, the Druid Peak Pack more or less falls apart. Without that leadership, the pack cycles through a couple of leaders, and Casanova comes back into the picture. And now, those daughters have no attachment to this pack necessarily. Casanova comes in, and 21's daughters leave with Casanova, and they go off and they start their own pack, the Blacktail Pack, which continued on for about 15 more years, the Blacktail Pack. And Casanova actually became a really great alpha male, very protective, great leader, all of this. And the question is, back on that day when 21 let him go, did he know that it was because one day he wasn't going to be around anymore? And that by letting him live, he knew that, well, Casanova, I'm not interested in him right now, but one day he'd be a great mate for my daughters. and take that however you want. But number 21's genetics lived on through his daughters because of the pact they formed with Casanova after his death. So there's the emotional way we can describe this. There's also something that's seated deeply in evolution, where there's a resistance to killing that wolf. So now we're going to switch to another wolf. And this is wolf number 926. And we're fast forwarding a little bit. This is the granddaughter of 21. So the great granddaughter of number 9. Right? And 926 lived a very different life. Very different life. 21 was a fictional character, right? But he also lived in a fictional Yellowstone, where elk populations were artificially inflated, where there was food everywhere. The ecosystem hadn't really come back into balance in terms of prey populations versus predator populations. But also wolves at the time of 21 were protected under the Endangered Species Act. Number 926 was born into a world after the wolves were delisted in 2011, and born into a world of wolf hunting. And a world where instead of there being 17,000 elk, there was 3,000 elk around her area. So in the first year of her life, she was born in 2011. In the first year of her life, she watched her mother get, who was at the time the most famous wolf in the world. If you remember news articles a few years back about a famous wolf in Yellowstone getting killed by a hunter, it was her mother, 926's mother. Her name was 06. She's also 832. But whatever. So 926, in the same year, in just her very first winter of life, watched her mother shot by a hunter and watched her uncle shot by a hunter. This is a strange pack, where her mother had scraped together her own pack by her own will. She had found 2 brothers and made them both her alpha male because one wasn't good enough for her. So 926 kind of grew up with early on with these kind of 2 fathers and 1 mother, and in her first year of life watched mom get shot and watched one of her fathers get shot, her uncle get shot. After that happened, the pack kind of disintegrated. There was a power vacuum that was left. There was an intense amount of sibling rivalry that cropped up throughout this period without this leadership. Let's get past that. And so 926 had 3 older sisters that were kind of the generation above her. They were born in the previous year, and they all descended into a bunch of kind of sibling rivalry. 2 of the sisters killed one of the others. Meanwhile, the surviving alpha male, he went out and found a new mate to try to restabilize the pack, and he brought his new mate back to the rest of the pack, and the sisters immediately killed her and ousted the alpha male, who gave up, and he walked 15 miles south to a different valley on the other side of Yellowstone and started a whole new life, just started over. And so 926, this is just her first year of life. Mother killed, uncle killed, father ousted, sister killed by her other sisters, right? Just amazing differences between that and 21's life. And because of this, she just became known as like the little wolf that could. She had a remarkable amount of tenacity. And so wolf watchers started at one point calling her Spitfire, because she was brazen, and she was just faced with so much adversity at every turn that she had no choice but to just face the bison head on and let it chase her away time and time again. So she was a I'll let this go for a second. There's a grizzly bear over here too, by the way.
Wait, really? What is it? Is it just lying down?
So 926, the whole Lamar Canyon pack, her pack's name was the Lamar Canyon pack, and it had replaced the Druid Peak pack. Still had a lot of genetics from 21, of course. The Lamar Canyon pack just kind of disappeared off the radar screen for a while. And wolf watchers in Yellowstone are really biting their nails. It was tough as a guide because we go out there and knowing that there are no wolves in this valley right now, so it's going to be hard to find them. So we know that they're not there. They're outside of the park, the pack is dissolving. And one day, 926 comes back into the park with this guy, a wolf called 925. But before he had a collar, we called him Big Gray. And Big Gray was a big wolf from an outside pack, and they got together in 925 and 926, had pups, and they regained a toehold in the Lamar Valley after a couple of years of it being very, very scarce out there. So now 925 and 926 have been together for a year. They went out on an elk hunt. And it was 925, 926, and all of their yearling pups. Right? So they had been born just a little less than a year before. And yearlings are pretty useless. They're not experienced enough to fight. They don't know how to kill anything. They're not good hunters yet. They're basically just kind of dead weight when it comes to the pack. And so here's 925 and 926, basically by themselves in terms of actually experienced wolves. And they're having to search farther and wider for prey because there's just less elk to go around. And so they walk west and they walk out of the Lamar Valley, and they walk out of their territory, and they walk squarely into the territory of the Prospect Peak Pack and nearby rivals. And there they find an elk, and there's a dramatic chase that ensues. And 925 and 926 are heading after this elk. The elk is perched up on the very, very edge of a very tall cliff. And often elk will put themselves in that situation backed up to a big cliff so that nothing can get around behind them, right? And the elk will defend itself with its front feet. 926 is about 90 pounds or so, and 925 is probably 120 pounds or so. And a full-grown female elk is about 500 pounds. And wolves that are going after bull elk, which is common, are like 750. So these are animals that are like 6 or 7 times bigger than them, right, that they're hunting. But the elk slips and it falls off of the cliff, and it lands at the bottom of the cliff, squarely into the territory of the Prospect Peak Pack. So shortly after they have gorged and filled their bellies, the Prospect Peak Pack catches something strange on the wind, and it's the scent of all the Lamar Canyon wolves in their territory. And so the Prospect Peak Pack was 12 wolves strong. Almost all of them were big, strong adults. And here's 925 and 926, full from a big, huge meal with a bunch of useless yearling pups. They're outnumbered and outgunned, and all these prospects are running at them. And so 925, 926, the rest of the pack, they take off running. The prospects are catching up. They're right on their heels. They're getting closer and closer and closer. The Lamars are losing ground. And for reasons that were hard to imagine, 925 stops dead, and he turns around and just stands there, while 926 and the pups just take off. He had let himself be taken down as bait by the prospects so that the rest of the pack could escape. The prospect descend on him. They tear him to ribbons there, right on the spot. Some of the pups kind of circle around and try to draw off some of the prospect males. It doesn't work. 925 is basically dead by the end of the day. But in doing so, 926, all the pups survived. They continued running for 5 miles before they slowed down. They made it all the way back to their den site. And now, all of the wolf watchers were thinking probably the same thing that 926 was, which is 926 was pregnant, and she was about to give birth to another litter of pups, and she just lost her alpha male, just like her great-grandmother so long ago, number 9, right? And so we're wondering what could possibly happen. 926 is doomed. Her pups are doomed. Just 1 week later, this is looking down to the north end of the Lamar Valley. The den site is basically over here. We hear howling coming from up in the mountains, and we look up, and on this side, right here on this cliff band, way up high, there's 926 and her pups, way up there, just hanging out on top of the cliff. Why not? And we look up though, and they're not howling. It's somebody else that's howling. And they are deep, low, baritone howls that alpha female and a bunch of pups wouldn't be able to make. And we look over, and 926 is also like, where is that howling coming from, right? Hearing howling coming from your territory when you're the only wolf, when you thought you were the only wolf in your territory, is a little alarming, right? And then we train our scopes right over here to the other side of this canyon. And there are 4 big, huge male prospect wolves. 4 of the same wolves that had just killed her alpha mate just a couple of days before. And they are locked under her and they see her. And there's a whole bunch of yearling pups there that are not related to those wolves. And 926 is about to give birth to a bunch of pups that don't belong to these prospect males. And so it's getting dark, we're all biting our nails. 926 sees them, and her and the pups take off running down the cliff and disappear into these trees. And the prospect males run down the cliff and disappear into the exact same spot. And then it gets too dark to see. And so, like, it was a very quiet dinner that night. We were wondering what is going to happen to 926. Oh my gosh, can she not catch a break? And we wake up in the morning and we go out looking for 926. And this is what we find. We find her with the 4 prospects. This is not, you know what those wagging tails mean, right? Sorry for the home video quality of this thing. But this is the 4 males and 926. They had come looking for a new friend. But all 4 of these males were trying to compete with each other for which one 926 would love the best. And so this is a wolf called 965, this beautiful white one, who is dominating one of his brothers called Twin, while 926 right here is not paying attention. She's like, whatever. And so, basically 926 picks one of these males, comes to an alpha female, has pups. You want that story to end happily, but over the next year, one by one, all 4 of these males die. One dies to disease, one dies in a battle with a rival pack, one just disappears off the map entirely, and one is shot by a hunter. And now it's 926, alone, again. The next season she goes out, she brings back another alpha female, or alpha male, her 3rd alpha male. A brother was tagging along, and so she's like, okay, this is my chance. They have pups together, all the pups die of mange. That male she brought back dies of canine distemper. Now it's just her, one daughter that managed to survive, and this brother that tagged along with the other alpha male, and that's it. So 926 has lost 3 alpha males. Her father was ousted from the pack, her uncle was killed, her mother was killed, her sister was killed by others. Just can't possibly catch a break. Right.
What happened to the youngsters?
All the pups basically died. Every litter of pups that she had kind of died, mostly due to disease. The yearlings when these 4 prospect males showed up, the yearlings that were hanging around, the daughters didn't mind them at all, big, huge, handsome male wolves. But the male yearlings of 926, her sons, they weren't very interested in those prospects being the new stepdads. And so they left the pack, left the park, and were shot. So then it's 926, it's that male brother of the other alpha male. So there's 926, another adult, and there's the daughter of 926, who's now a couple of years old. And they had kind of just disappeared off the radar screen. We kind of thought that they were dead. We didn't know what had happened. On the rare occasion that we did see them, we didn't see any pups with them. We thought that this pack was basically on its way out. And then in the middle of October, we're just now a month ago, right, or a couple months ago, so this October, wolf watchers go out and they see 926's daughter in the front of the pack. They're all walking across Lamar Valley. There's the daughter in the front. Behind her is that other brother. And behind them is a whole bunch of pups. And behind them is 926. And so now 926 is no longer the alpha female. She kind of ceded her power to the daughter. And now 926 is a grandma. I know that's really how you want the story to end. That's not how it ends, though. So when I was preparing this talk, when I was starting to think about how I wanted to do this talk, 926 was still alive. Just about 3 weeks ago, 926 and her pack left the park just over the border, and 926 was shot. And woke up one morning to this in the headlines, right? So, oh my gosh, so unfortunate that happened. But for this particular wolf, is it really surprising that at the end of the day, this is how she met her end with one more of these big, huge struggles like this, right? And, but, you know, in terms of the big picture, she had lived through everything. And what she finally got to see happen before she was killed was she got to become a grandmother. She got to see her daughter give birth to pups and continue the lineage of this Lamar Canyon pack that started way back with number 9, and then with number 21, and then through 06 into 926 into her daughter, and now these pups are still out there. When I head to Yellowstone in a week from now, when we go out looking, we're going to be looking for these pups, and we're going to be looking for the daughter of 926 and her mate, right? So watching wolves is it's heartbreaking sometimes, right? We want our stories to end nice and happily. The thing about watching wolves is that it's not, you know, it's in a way it's watching a soap opera, right? And it's watching a play or an opera or something like that. But the stories that we write tend to always have a nice, clean, tidy package where we wrap things up and we move on. And that's not what happens when you watch wolves, because they live real lives, right? And they are honest lives. And when we watch their stories, we haven't prescribed what the end is going to be. And in a way, that's a much more useful story, because that's what life is actually like for us, right? You know, every single one of our struggles that we have is hard-earned, right? And you know, failure can be around any corner, and you know, it's not always a happy picture in all of this. So I want to just kind of button things up by putting this story of this dynasty of wolves into the larger picture, so that we don't see 926's death by bullet as this tremendous tragedy that it seems like on the surface, and instead look at it at the larger perspective. So first of all, I saved all of my graphs and maps and stuff to the very end. When it all started, there was 31 wolves that were reintroduced. Now there's 1,700 wolves throughout northwest Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. Each one of these circles is a known wolf pack. The reintroduction, ecologically speaking, by all measures, has been a tremendous success. And the presence of wolves in the landscape has surpassed the expectations of a lot of the biologists who originally did this in the first place. Wolves are hunted now, right? They're no longer in the Endangered Species Act. The states in this area, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, are not fond of wolves and are doing their darndest to eradicate as many of them as possible. But the thing is, wolves are here to stay, because the Endangered Species Act basically stipulates that if if a population recovers to a certain degree, then the federal government stops managing that population and states can gain the rights to continue managing that. What that often means is that's when hunting starts on that animal, right? But the caveat is that there's a threshold number of wolves that has to remain in the landscape. And if that threshold fails to be met, then the federal government regains control of the management of that species. And for as much as folks in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, in the political side of things, are really against wolves, the one thing that they hate more than wolves is the federal government taking over their ability to manage those wolves. And so wolves are here to stay. And despite the intense hunting pressure, although hunting pressure on these wolves changes their pack dynamics dramatically, think about what a hunter's bullet did to fracturing the Lamar Canyon pack to 926's mother, and what it did when she was shot, right? It changes the dynamics of packs. But overall, the numbers of wolves have remained remarkably steady no matter how many of them end up getting shot. This is the numbers from Idaho. Wolf hunting started in Idaho in like 2010 or maybe 2009 over there. And there's a few hundred wolves shot every year in Idaho, and this is the wolf population. It is kind of rock solid right in the 700s. Wolves are resilient, and wolves are very good at controlling their own numbers, much better than we are. Wolves are a lot better at finding each other than hunters and trappers are. And if wolves start eking into each other's territory, they kill each other. and they spread out and cover more territory as necessary. So they ebb and flow and take care of their own numbers really, really well. And if there's a vacancy in an area, then gosh, there's a lot more pups that survive the next year. And so the wolf populations are very steady. They're not going anywhere. So that's kind of the upshot of the numbers side of the game of the wolf reintroduction. And ecologically speaking, the reintroduction has been a huge success as well. Right? This blurry graph here, you don't need to read, you just have to see the shape. This is years down here. This starts in the 60s, and it goes up basically to today. And what this is showing is the number of elk in the northern range of Yellowstone, way up here at 20,000, and then down here at 4,000 here. And what you see is that in the absence of wolves, wolves are eradicated from the ecosystem, and bears and mountain lions, the elk population really started to skyrocket. Wolves were reintroduced to the ecosystem right about here. You can see the elk population has come down since. Now, a really important takeaway is that wolves get all the blame for killing all the elk every time. People think that wolves have killed all the elk. Oh my God, there's not going to be any elk left because all the wolves killed them all. And while wolves have contributed to the decline in the elk population from this artificially inflated number down to the carrying capacity, simultaneously with the wolf reintroduction has been a dramatic increase in the number of grizzly bears in the population, the number of mountain lions, both of which contribute more to elk mortality than wolves do. So it's a whole ecological system that's at play here. It's the reintroduction of all the predators and the stability of all the predators, not just wolves. But wolves have contributed to the decline in elk numbers, such that we're seeing changes in the landscape. Now, if you've seen this video that's going around called How Wolves Change Rivers, and the video goes something like, there was a time back in the Dark Ages when wolves were all killed and everything was horrible. And then the wolves were brought back, and the elk came back, and the skies cleared up, and the waters flowed clean, and the beavers returned, and the songbirds started singing, and the truffula trees sprouted out of the ground, and all that stuff, right? And the narrative of that is that wolves have fixed everything immediately in the last 20 years of their reintroduction. And as you suspect, it's never that simple. And wolves haven't fixed anything. This is a big, there are major changes to the ecosystem in the absence of all of these, in the absence of predators. And that can't be fixed in 20 years. But things are moving in the right direction. This is a shot of the confluence of the Lamar River in, I think, like 2000 or something like that. And this is that same area last year. And there's a moose for scale. So the fact that there's so many willows regenerating here is really promising. A return of riparian vegetation in an area that had been heavily browsed down, to the extent that moose can actually come back into the northern range of Yellowstone in numbers that they haven't really been able to for quite some time. Going back, this is a shot of a particular aspen grove in 2006 and again in 2010, showing that with fewer mouths feeding on vegetation, a lot of these aspen stands that have been having a harder time regenerating are now able to kind of reproduce, and those saplings can get up above the browse line. So we're seeing trends in the right direction. Not quite like the magical unicorns and rainbows thing that you see, but we're moving in that direction, which is really, really great. And then, in terms of our relationship with wolves, this reintroduction has changed that quite a bit too. We never expected that there would be a wolf watching economy in Yellowstone. Biologists thought that we'd really reintroduce wolves into the landscape, and that's the last we'd see of them, because they don't like people. It's a tremendously huge place, and we thought they would live out their lives in private. And what was never expected is that they would live out their epic lives right in front of us for us to be able to watch. And as a result, people like Carol can come to Yellowstone and become inspired to write children's books. And people in Vermont on a cold day can come and learn about wolves and imagine what it was like for them to be out there, or for wolves to be here for that matter, right? Let me just bounce back. Also, we're getting better at figuring out how to handle the relationships between the different factions of people that do and do not like wolves. We're paying out large sums of money to livestock ranchers who lose their cattle or sheep due to wolf depredations. Defenders of wildlife and state game management agencies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year paying out livestock losses. And in Wyoming, they pay ranchers 7 to 1 for what the cow was worth at the time that it died. And so, the financial loss of wolf livestock conflict is becoming more and more moot. There's obviously a lot buried in that bullet point that we don't have time to unpack. But suffice it to say that we're learning how to figure out this conflict. This is one of my favorite shots of wolves in Yellowstone. This is a wolf called 889. I'm not going to tell you anything about her, other than that she is the descendant of the Crystal Creek wolf pack, the very, very first pack to be reintroduced. Her ancestor was the first paw to be put down after 70 years absence in Yellowstone. And that happened right there at this reacclimation center. And so here is, this wolf 6 or 7 generations out from when her ancestors were released, on a landscape where you can see this tremendous amount of aspen regeneration right here, in between where she is now and where her family came from, which I think is just a really beautiful shot. So, what's the upshot of this, and why do we care so much about watching wolves? Again, we really want that story of 926 to end happily, and it doesn't. But that's significant. For all that 926 went through in her life, she really demonstrated that for wolves, the attitude is looking forward, looking ahead, and saying, what's next? What problem can I overcome today? And perseverance is really the currency of survival, right? And that victories are not really measured in a single day by what happens to one pup or with one bullet or something like that, but it's measured over really long periods of time. The fact that 926 was shot, how lucky are we that there was a wolf there to be shot in the first place, in a sense, right? Wolves had been exterminated, and now they're not. Now they're here to stay, and that's a victory, right? And I think maybe as an ecologist, the takeaway that I have from watching wolves is something that applies so poignantly to our lives as humans, is that the landscape that is the healthiest is often the one that contains the most amount of conflict in it, right? And that seen over long periods of time in the overall trajectory of history, that's how you measure victories. And I think that's what Aldo Leopold was getting at back in the 1960s. He had the first inklings, the first thoughts of reintroducing wolves. And he said only the mountain has really lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of the wolf. Thank you. If you want to sneak out, you're welcome to. I'm happy to answer as many questions as is out, though. Ken, you want to hit the lights back there? Thanks. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
Are llamas used at all in pens for the ranchers to repel wolves, or is that tools that they couldn't? The second question is, have you seen any measurable impacts of global climate change?
Oh, that's okay. See if I can remember both those questions long enough to answer both. So the first question was, are llamas being used as guard animals, essentially, in like sheep herds and stuff? Llamas make better guard dogs than dogs. You didn't know that. And guard llamas are being used. I've seen them out there, and it's really fun to go by a herd of sheep and double take and say that's a sheep. Because they're very defensive of their pack. But even guard animals get killed by wolves once in a while. So guard dogs and guard llamas, it's not a surefire thing. Really, what has been a surefire thing is the concept of range riders that are known as cowboys. Paying a ranch hand to go out there and be with your cattle. A lot of the times, these livestock interactions between wolves are happening not on the rancher's back step, but out on public land that belongs to all of us, where ranchers are paying a couple dollars a head per cow to put them out there and leave them there, and then pick them up in the fall when they're nice and fat, right? And so, you know, we could talk for days about the politics of that and whether that's antiquated and how we should change these laws. But at the end of the day, one thing that's been very effective is instead of just kicking your cows out the door in the spring and bringing them back in the fall, essentially, to go out to pay a ranch hand, a cowboy, to go out there and stay with them. And just the presence of humans around those cattle is almost a surefire way to prevent livestock degradation. The second question you had was about climate change in relation to wolves. And one really poignant one that's being studied intensely right now through the University of Wyoming. A fellow named Arthur Middleton has been doing a ton of research on this that's been picked up by National Geographic a lot. Has to do with the elk populations. And so, you know, what is it? As do the elks, so do the wolves, or something like that. The wolf population, the elk populations are using the landscape very differently than they once did, or have different pressures than they once did. The northern range of Yellowstone, which is where the Lamar Valley is, right? That's not a place where prey species spend their whole lives. They go up, that's high country summer range with nice, fresh, beautiful grass in, you know, late May and June and July. And so elk migrate there to be there to feed on it and then leave. The northern range of Yellowstone is 8 degrees Fahrenheit hotter on average than it was just 25 years ago. And as a result, the amount of time in which grass is actually green there is a lot less, by the order of a few weeks. So, you know, if you've spent much time in Wyoming or Montana, summer doesn't last very long. It's like winter, 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 spring, summer, fall, winter, 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 right? And so you don't have very many weeks to fit in all of the feeding you need to do to get ready for the next winter. So the loss of 3 weeks of nice green forage makes a big difference. And so so that has implications for the survivorship of elk, therefore the numbers of elk that are in the ecosystem to be preyed upon, and also as elk shift their distribution, that shifts the distribution of where wolves have to spend their time and when. I don't know that the thread of how wolves have been affected by that has been fully elucidated, but there's been tremendous impacts to the elk by warming temperatures in the northern range. Thanks. Yeah.
I was curious about when you said when you had that chart of the population of the elk, I was wondering if there was impact of just overpopulation and disease as well as the grizzly bears and other predators.
Almost like a boom bust thing, where at some point if there's too many elk, then there's going to be a massive starving die-off or something like that. Yeah, well, and I think you know, that population did fluctuate a lot because they were so far over capacity that in cold winters there would be massive die-offs that you don't necessarily get when there's lower populations. You know, I don't know if there has been a lot of studies looking at whether the overpopulation itself was a cause of their decline. But the key takeaway for that research in that time period when the population did start to decline is that those numbers are coming down as a result of predators being back in the landscape at higher numbers, and major changes in the regulations around elk hunting. That number, when the elk, that graph spiked way up in the beginning in the 60s, that was because we were actually managing elk basically in the same way that we manage cattle, right? You're raising elk to go shoot them. And so our philosophies around game management have also changed over the years, and so it's a lot more complicated than just, you know, there were no wolves, therefore the graph goes up, and then there were wolves, and then therefore the graph goes down. It's, you know, it's a gray area. Yeah. Yes.
You said wolves are here to stay, and then your point about the federal government acting as a deterrent to states, because they don't want to lose control of managing the wolves for the federal government. How much is that apt to change under an administration like current?
Yeah, I mean, the Endangered Species Act so far has held on, And that's really the floodgate that would change everything. The most important piece of environmental law that is out there, period, is the Endangered Species Act. If you're wondering how you can do your part to support wolves or support wildlife in general, and just support responsible wildlife management and all these things, defending the Endangered Species Act is a really good place to start right now, because that is being, there are attempts to erode that away, right? So if there's no Endangered Species Act, then there's no more a disincentive for the states to not kill all of their delisted species, right? So keep an eye on the Endangered Species Act, and when you see that in the news, pay attention to that, and that's a really good place to invest your attention if you're a wildlife.
Would it help to right now call our representatives in
Yeah,
Congress?
I think so,
And
because
just register our support?
I think that's a really smart idea. I think that a lot of folks don't understand the power that the Endangered Species Act actually has. It's an environmental law that has a lot of teeth, and it muddles up a lot of government progress in a very good way. And for the benefit of things like wolves and grizzly bears and all that. And so, but that's not something that's necessarily recognized by politicians who usually, environmental issues are not their very top priority. And so it may not be understood that the Endangered Species Act it's not just one of the many acts out there. It is like the thing that is the most important act for wildlife preservation, or at least endangered species. Yeah. So I think that would be a wise thing to do. Yeah.
All the watchers of the wolves, don't the wolves then learn to be unwary of humans so that when they wander out of the park, they're basically sitting ducks for the hunters?
Before I answer that question, it reminds me to remind you to check out in the back corner of the lobby out there are a whole bunch of articles that I put out. Half of them are articles about that were published in the early 1990s, before the reintroduction actually happened, about what was going on politically, what was the scene, what was the culture around this. They're all local papers from Montana and Idaho and Wyoming. The other stack of papers is all modern headlines about what's going on. A couple of those papers address your question, which is, from a population standpoint, a wolf is a wolf is a wolf. A wolf in Yellowstone is no more important, ecologically speaking, than a wolf that's in the Beartooth National Forest or the Ozorka National Forest, right? But when it comes, but a wolf is not a wolf when it comes to the amount of ecotourism dollars that wolf brings in, for instance, right? Should we treat the wolves in Yellowstone differently from a management perspective than wolves outside of the park? And the other piece that's really important to think about is the behavior of wolves different in Yellowstone because they have grown up essentially around people. The Lamar Canyon den site is like 1/8 of a mile away from a road. And so anytime the wolves want to bring food back and forth between pups and elsewhere, they have to cross the road. They spend all day long with 1,000 people standing on these weird strips of asphalt, pointing big telescopes up at them. And that is just part of their life. They get used to that. That said, wolves generally don't want anything to do with us. And if you're out in Yellowstone and you leave that asphalt and start walking towards the wolves, they'll get up and walk half a mile away, right? But there are plenty of times where wolves walk right in front of a car, or they don't nearly have the fear of humans that wolves outside the park do because they haven't grown up with them. And so, 926, when she was shot, was basically walking right down the road near Cook City. So to her, what's the difference between walking down the road there and walking down the road 5 miles back, near the den site? And that brings into question, one of the tenets of hunting in our country, which is, the idea of fair chase. If you're going to hunt an animal, it has to be a hunt and not just, going to the grocery store and picking up your wolf next to the pork aisle, right? There has to be an element of actual challenge to this, and it has to be, a fair fight. And are the wolves in Yellowstone sufficiently different that it's no longer fair chase to hunt them at the borders of Yellowstone, because a wolf that's walked over the boundary from Yellowstone is going to behave differently than a wolf that grew up living outside of the national forest away from people. So it's not an answer question, is the short answer of all of that. remains to be seen. One thing that did happen after wolves were delisted, and then 06, most famous wolf in the world, was shot within a couple of weeks, is there's a huge amount of pressure to put quotas along the borders of Yellowstone. So even if hunting couldn't be closed at the border, the harvest numbers could be reduced. So now along the northern edge of the park, the quota is, off the northeastern side, the quota is 2 wolves. Off the northwestern side is 2 wolves. And 2 wolves is a lot better than unlimited quotas, but 2 is enough for 926 to get shot, for instance. So it's a good step in the right direction, and I see it as a great act of compromise, Sandal.
How many people work in Yellowstone on wolf dynamics? And does every wolf that's like born in Yellowstone get numbers?
Not every wolf. About something like 30% of wolves in the park wear radio collars at some point in their life. Wolves that don't wear radio collars don't get numbers, but often there's an effort to radio collar the alphas of the pack, because if you follow the alphas around, you're likely to have most of the rest of the pack around as well. There are some great crews of people who do amazing. Are any of you here tonight? Any wolf crew people? We're talking to some of. Okay. So no one fact check me. There are some absolutely remarkable wolf crew technicians that go out every winter, and they spend. There's some focused wolf studies where there's a crew of people that go out, and there's a team of 3 people that's assigned to every single pack in the park, and they spend basically sun up to sundown every single day, regardless of the weather, regardless of the temperature, with eyeballs through spotting scopes on those wolves if they're in view, recording every little movement they make, everything they do. And so there's a ton of time invested in watching that and then collating that. And then above all that, there's a team of National Park Service biologists who are kind of collating that data. There's Doug Smith, who, if you've seen a guy in a handlebar mustache with a Park Service hat talking about wolves, that's Doug Smith. And there's a couple other people that are also head biologists on all this. But it's a fairly small crew other than that. In addition to the National Park Service, there's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has their wolf people, and USGS has their wolf people, and the state game agencies have their people, and so there's a big collaborative network of wolf biologists that work together on this stuff. Another long answer to what should have been a short one.
No, I'm glad to hear there's a lot of people.
Yes.
Are there any other healthy wolf pack areas in the States besides in Yellowstone?
So Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan have larger wolf populations than the West does. You don't hear about it because you never see them. The area is forested. You can't just go out and set up a spotting scope and look over 5 miles of landscape until you find them, which makes it sound easier than it actually is. Those states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, they never actually lost their wolves. They were never extirpated. They were always there all along. They had been harvested down to the brink of extinction, I believe, but they returned on their own through exchange from Canada. So it's a continuous population from Canada down in. And there's essentially a continuous population now in the West from Canada down into Montana. And so there's genetic exchange all the way through. A wolf that was, did I say this already? A wolf that was trapped in northwest Wyoming was just found at the edge of the Grand Canyon a couple years ago. So when I said that wolves can get up and walk 1,000 miles, that's an example of it, walking from Yellowstone to the Grand Canyon.
Any in Maine?
I don't think there are any in Maine. Yeah, I think it's a matter of time. Well, the wolf conversation in the East is tricky because a lot of our coyotes have a lot of wolf genetics in them. And that's an ongoing area of research, certainly, to figure out what does that actually mean. Is it that wolves and coyotes are actually interbreeding somewhere, or is it that these are self-breeding populations of these things that at one point got wolf genetics mixed in? But there are wolves in Ontario. They're not very far away, and in some I do wonder if they show up in Maine now and again. I think it's just a matter of time until they might be found more regularly. I think that wolf I think it's unrealistic. A lot of debate around this, around is there a place for wolves in the Northeast, in the Adirondacks, in Maine, and we could all share our opinions on that forever. I think that wolves are hard to live with. And if they're hard to live with out west, where there's nobody anywhere out there, then I think they would be impossible to live with here. They might do fine, hunting white-tailed deer in the Adirondacks. Like we could have a population, but I think, is it worth the incredible amount of headache that would cause? It would be, I think, the stories out west would be a drop in the bucket compared to having wolves in our own backyards, on Hunter Mountain or something. I'm just kind of speculating, so I don't have to into that.
No one has a question about a slide, about 3 or 4 slides back.
Hey, no one.
The one with the Crystal Creek wolf that you said was your favorite photo. Right?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
What was your question?
There's a wolf there, and then there's something like.
Oh, good night. See if you can tell me what that is.
What's up there in that field?
Yeah, there's a bison right there.
Oh, yeah, you saw it.
Let's see. Bison there, and all this up.
To explain how the loss of one individual population would really have an effect. So I was wondering, are there any studies being conducted about the original Canadian population that these wolves were taken from and how that has changed as a result of the reintroduction?
Yeah, there's like a whole other side of this whole reintroduction story. It's this beautiful gain to the Yellowstone ecosystem, but like up in Canada, somebody's missing some wolves up there. And I don't think there's been any study at all on what that process did to those local areas. Wolves were taken from essentially the edge of Wood Buffalo National Park, or is that what's, it's a Canadian national park called Wood Buffalo National Park, and there was 31 wolves taken from that, so that's not a huge number considering when there's hundreds and hundreds of wolves harvested in legal hunts down here. 31 is in a sense a drop in the bucket, unless it was part of your pack. So I don't know. I was actually really curious about that myself as I was putting all this together. I was thinking, wait a minute, no one ever said what happened to the rest of the wolves in Canada. So yeah, I'm curious as well about that. Yeah.
Do people who shoot wolves, do they do anything with them? Can you use a pelt for coat? Can you eat them?
You can't really eat them. It's a trophy. So you're hunting it for the pelt or for the taxidermy or something like that. And shooting a wolf is not just shooting wolf. It's like, there's a lot of different reasons why one might shoot a wolf, but like I said before, a wolf is more than just something with a whole bunch of fur on it. It's more than just 100 pounds of meat with fur on it. It's symbolic. And in the early days of wolf hunting, when they were delisted, that first hunt happened, there was a surprising, statistically significant amount of Yellowstone wolves that were harvested right over the border. The number of wolves that were wearing radio collars in Yellowstone, I said, is about 30%. More than half of the wolves that were harvested that were Yellowstone wolves were wearing radio collars. I didn't say that very well. But a disproportionately large number of the Yellowstone wolves that were shot over the border were wearing collars. So the question is, were those wolves actually targeted? You have all these wolves to choose from throughout the northern Rockies. Are folks going out to target collared Yellowstone wolves because shooting those wolves means something different. It's a statement. So add another layer to the complexity of our feelings around wolves, and think about the dynamics of Yellowstone wolves that were shot in that early hunt.
Can the hunters hack into the collars?
Not easily, but yeah, there's definitely a wolf hunting website that said as much as, if you have the ability to turn on a radio receiver, tune your channels to this range, to the frequency, and start scanning. And so I think it's very, I certainly don't want to paint every wolf hunter, in that light. There's a lot of folks that I think are really good people that hunt wolves. I don't agree with them, but they're nice people, and everybody has their own reasons for doing things. One of the things I really don't understand is tuning in a radio antenna to the frequency of a wolf swooping, so no fair chase there. And that's never been, officially confirmed, but it happened. Yeah.
But you're only collaring the alphas, and the alphas are the bigger ones, right? So maybe more advantageous.
Well, so you said that, you're calling the alphas are bigger, so wouldn't that be a better trophy, right? The only thing that matters is the pelts. When you wear a collar, it wears all the fur off your neck. So the pelt is actually ruined. You can't get anything for a pelt that's been wearing a radio collar because the fur is not intact in the neck. And so it's a choice, to shoot a collared wolf or a non-collared wolf. And if you're shooting one with the collar, assuming there are other wolves there, you need a decision to do that. Yeah, and it does cost researchers a lot of money. Each one of the telemetry radio collars, the ones that just submit a beep, costs about $4,000 when all is said and done to put on an animal. GPS collars that they wear cost about $20,000 when all is said and done to put on. Between the technology, hiring the helicopter, the ketamine tranquilizer, all of the stuff that goes into the whole process of the collaring operation, it's a lot of money invested in these collars. So it's a big hit to research when we lose collared wolves.
Why was there a data gap in the 80s on your part?
On the elk gap there? I think there was just a couple of years where they couldn't do that survey. I don't know if it was just bad weather or if it was something else, but I think it was just lack of data because they couldn't get out and do the elk survey that year. Lack of funding or something. Yeah. So there were elk. It didn't suddenly go down to zero. It was just that there was no survey conducted that year. Well, so I'll kind of dismiss class. I'm happy to chat with you afterwards because I just saw you have another question. I'll remind you that we still have one more space in our Yellowstone trip in May. If you're curious about that, send me an email, Sean@NorthBranchNatureCenter.org. And then please do check out all the wolf literature and stuff in the back corner. I think it'll be a little more enlightening after knowing what you know now. So thank you all for coming out tonight.